All right. Well, welcome to the Q podcast, everyone. We have a very, very special guest here. I'm glad we can have him on. He's a local author and teacher, most notably, I think recently here, the author of the Rabbit in Red trilogy, horror trilogy series. He is Joe Chianakas. How's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Joe. And just a little background, I did a story on Joe a couple years ago. It was in 2015, and this was either around or right before the release of the first one in the Rabbit in the Red trilogy series.
Yeah, beautiful article. I've got it framed.
Oh,
You
great.
did such a good
Well,
job.
hey,
It
there
was
we go.
really cool.
There you go, guys. And the reason I have you on now is that the conclusion of that trilogy, the book is called Bury the Rabbit.
Yes.
It is being released tomorrow, and you are marking the release with a book signing at Barnes & Noble.
Yeah, I'll be at the Peoria Barnes & Noble from 1 to 3 signing copies of Bury the Rabbit for its release, and we'll have the first 2 books there too, of course.
Awesome. So with that in mind, I thought, hey, what a great time to have you come in. It's Halloween's right around the corner.
Yeah.
I know you're a fan.
Yeah.
So I guess if you wanted to start out with, take me back to, I guess, what are some of your earliest memories of just writing in general? What made you kind of fall in love with the idea and the concept of writing?
Oh, sure. I used to devour R.L. Stine and Christopher Pike books when I was in junior high. I mean, I really credit those for shaping my love of entertainment and my aspirations to be an author. And I remember, I love getting the Scholastic book club order forms. I was such a nerd. So it was like, that was my favorite time in school. You know, if you remember getting those, and I'd go through and I'd go home with a wish list for like $100 worth of books, and maybe I'd get $10 worth or something. But they were all thrillers and Fear Street and all that good stuff. And I would devour those over the weekend, and then I would try to write my own.
Okay.
So even like in 11, 12 years old, I'm like, this is so cool. And so I used to. Oh, they were 2-page stories, and I'm sure they were terrible. And but I wish I had saved them now, you know. But that's kind of how I really got started. And then, in high school, when I was a little bit older, I got introduced to Stephen King, and then that just consumed my life.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of King fans, once they come across his books for the first time and kind of fall in love with those stories, it just consumes you.
Right.
And so I was even a member of the Stephen King Book of the Month Club. All right, and you'd get this original hardcover. Be a surprise every, and I read through those, and I just thought, this is the coolest thing ever. And I always wanted to try to write, and it takes a long time, I think, to develop a craft and to learn how to do all that stuff. But I was always doing short stories and a little bit of journalism and whatnot in high school and college too.
Yeah. So it was always kind of thrillers were right up your alley right from the beginning.
There's something about being scared.
Yeah.
And I know, again, some people, they like romance because it gives them all the feels, or they like comedy because they want to laugh. And I like the scary stuff because it's just, I don't know. It makes you question, our own fears. But I also think there's a little bit of nostalgia tied into it. My mom was a huge horror movie junkie, so probably every time I watch a horror movie, there's almost like a little bit of nostalgia there too. It takes me back to that innocent time when it was so easy to get scared, and you and your best friends would stay up way too late just watching movie after movie. And even browsing the video store, like those are VHS tapes, and looking at all those covers and the back of the movie descriptions. I love all that stuff, and it's kind of all of those passions is kind of what went into Rabbit in Red.
Right. Okay. And when did you feel like, you said you had written a lot of either short stories or your own type of stories, and maybe even smaller novels, but when did you feel like you could actually embark upon writing a whole book yourself?
I tried several times, all throughout. Well, and actually, the story I tell is, so when I was 22, and I just graduated college, I wanted to see if I could just write a novel from beginning to end with an arc and a climax and be 60, 70,000 words minimum. And I did. It's this terrible... Oh, it's awful. It's a road trip, young adult coming of age story, and it's not even really scary. It's just dramatic. But it was just, a 22-year-old trying to see, can I do it? And so that was just an exercise of discipline. Like I said, it's a terrible story. No one's ever read it. But it gave me the idea. It's like, okay, well, I just need life experience. I feel like I just need something else. And so I'd keep... Yeah, I was a teacher, a high school teacher all throughout my 20s, and I taught creative writing, and I'd keep a journal of ideas, and every now and then I'd try to write a novel, and sometimes I just get stuck, and I'm like, well, this, either this isn't the one for me right now, or I don't have enough life experience to actually write this. So when I got the idea for Rabbit in Red, which I think was the summer of 2014, maybe, it was just one of those light bulb moments. And I wrote 70,000 words in 3 weeks. I've never written that fast before. But I sat down and I outlined the entire thing in one day, and I wrote the first draft in 3 weeks. Now, again, that first draft was really terrible. Of course, I thought it was a masterpiece, right, at first, but I put it away, and there's this huge revision process, and it really takes almost a year of rewriting and editing. But I think it just was a matter of my passion and my writing talent, if you will, converging, and that happens at different times in our lives. I think for everyone, someone might be very lucky and do it when they're 16. Right. Someone else might do it when they're 60, and I don't think it matters when you do it. If you have a passion and a hunger for it, eventually your writing talent and your passion for a story, they meet in this magical place, and that's when it happens.
Was there a light bulb moment, or you said how you wrote 70,000 words, in that short amount of time, and you probably couldn't have imagined doing that ever. But was there a real light bulb moment for it? Was it like, I guess, a theme or a character or something from Rabbit in Red that kind of just spurred you on that path? Yeah,
it was a variety of different factors. I mean, the first was, again, I love scary movies. But I tried to think about, like, what is my fear? And I remember that summer in particular, reading in the paper even, there was just a series of home invasions, more than I think what Peoria had ever had.
Right.
There was a huge trend of them. And I started having nightmares about it, which is weird, right? But and when I have a nightmare, I wanted to write it down. Like, okay, could I actually get in the head of someone who's experiencing a home invasion? And it's really creepy to try to write that. But I was like, what would it feel like? And I go back to one of my favorite movies, The Strangers, which is a home invasion story, and someone breaks into a house, and there's no reason for it, though. That's my favorite part of the end, is the not to spoil anything, but the main character is like, she's dying on the floor, and she's like, why did you pick this house? And the intruder says, because you were home. And it just sends chills through me. So I think I started to play with an idea of what would happen to a young boy, a teenage character, because I like focusing on young adult characters. What would happen if that had happened to him in his lifetime, but he turned to scary movies and scary stories as a way that was both sort of cathartic and a way to try to figure out why bad things happen to good people.
Right.
So I approached the story from that angle, and that was the first part of Rabbit in Red, is dealing with this character that experienced that tragedy and then throws himself into the horror genre. At the same time, I love geek culture. I love the fandoms that are out there. So you think about something like The Big Bang Theory, Ready Player One's one of my all-time favorite novels. There's certainly allusions to Ready Player One in my story, and it was this idea of going back and almost reliving and experiencing your favorite stories in a Willy Wonka-like adventure. So it all came together. So there's that fun celebration factor of Stephen King and horror films and scary movies that we can use virtual reality to reenact, and yet it becomes its own world at the same time. And then on the other hand, really trying to dive into, I think, what good horror does, and that's trying to understand human fears and how we react to those challenges.
Right.
And it's nice that we can do it through fiction, because I don't want to know what I would do in real life.
Yeah, in real life.
It's nice to think about it in a story.
It's nice to have that avenue in a book format, or a fiction format. Now, I guess if you wanted to explain to maybe people that hadn't heard about Rabbit in Red before, you kind of touched on the plot a little bit, but go a little bit more in depth on what the book's about.
So it starts with a contest of riddles. I love riddles. I always loved writing riddles, and for some people that's their favorite part, is just reading the riddles. But it's this group. It's a group of teenagers. In the first book, it's a group of teenagers who solve these horror riddles to be invited to Rabbit in Red Studios. So I always do a disclaimer that there are no rabbits, really. There is no rabbit monster or, bloody red rabbit or something. Rabbit in Red is the name of a Hollywood studio. And it's actually an allusion to the Halloween movie. So if you're a fan of the original Halloween, then you'll see where I came up with that title if you watch that movie closely. But anyway, they get invited through a contest to compete with one another to see who knows the horror industry the best. twist.
Gotcha.
And the people who know it the best get a sort of golden ticket to be a part of that industry. The guy who runs it is this crazy billionaire. I always loved the idea of a crazy billionaire. If you had so much money, what would you do? And you torture people.
It's not like those people don't exist either.
Right, yeah, you don't have to stretch too far, I suppose. So my crazy billionaire is JB, and he runs the studio and he invites these kids out there. And then they go through a series of challenges, but the stories that they love start to come to life. People actually go missing. There's a that sort of mystery is at play, like what's really happening here, what's real and what's not. And it turns out, without spoiling the end, the twist is almost something unethical, but brings these kids into this world that if you want to make these movies, you've got to take your game to the next level. And so that's what opens up the sequel. And then the second one is called Burn the Rabbit. Again, no rabbits get burned, but there's a fire theme. And I always love the idea of playing with fire. So we take virtual reality. And I ask myself, I love haunted houses. Like, I love this time of year for going to haunted houses. And I tell my own students, like, you'll see me when I'm 60. I'm still going through. All right, you can't stop me. But I thought, well, how cool would it be to have those massive haunts enhanced by virtual reality? So you're physically going through them, but you get the virtual reality component, so you can do anything. And then take it like almost an American Idol style competition. What if you had to have, what was the scariest haunt that you could create, and who can get through them? So book 2 plays with that, and these kids, once again, they develop these new challenges, and there's a new set of characters, but the problem is, again, things start to happen for real. We lose some people in there because there's sort of a revenge story. And then that sets up our last one, which is a real-world scavenger hunt. So I keep the riddles going, and they have to travel throughout the U.S. to real-world locations that inspired some of our favorite scary stories. So you get a little bit of history, kind of like, I always say that's my little Dan Brown moment. I always love how Dan Brown throws in a little history of his thrillers, you know. So I do that a little bit, and it's it's just a really cool adventure story, too.
Yeah. Well, when did you know that you had the material for a trilogy? Because most people might finish a book and they're like, well, that's good. I'm done with that. How did you know you had a trilogy?
Yeah, I intentionally ended book 1 so that it could be a standalone or a series.
Okay.
And it was sort of that idea that's like, well, if someone really likes it and you twist my arm, I'll write a second one. That sort of idea. But as I was initially shopping it around, the original publisher that picked it up was a series publisher. And so to be completely honest, I don't usually tell people this, to be completely honest, I wrote the outline for the trilogy the day before submitting it to the publisher. It's like, okay, I better come up with something.
Yeah.
So what would I actually do? But I'm really glad I did that. It's the way it turned out, by the way, is radically different than that night before outline.
Yeah.
But it was like, I gotta have something, and I wanted to pitch that. But so it got accepted, and then I remember talking like, so how's book 2 coming along? And like, oh, I'm supposed to be working on book 2 already? No, I have no idea. But I really thought the interesting challenge, the light bulb moment for the trilogy came down to this. Book 1 is a celebration of that geekdom and horror culture and Stephen King and all these things we've been talking about. And then but really, I don't know if I really call it a scary novel. I don't know if I'd call it one that's really going to keep you up at night. Some people say that, I guess, if they haven't had the experience maybe some of us have had in that genre. So I thought to myself, okay, here I am in book 1 celebrating this culture. I've got sort of a Scooby-Doo style mystery, all right? It's a lot of fun, and there are some very serious subjects addressed. But now if I'm going to continue this, I want to go dark, and I want to go deep, and I want to see if I can do what my idols have done. And so my goal, whether it was successful or not, I'll leave up to the readers, but my goal in book 2 was I'm going dark. I want to scare you. I want this to be disturbing. I want people to not have seen that coming. Oh my gosh, we really cared about these characters, and now you did this to them. That's not supposed to happen in Scooby-Doo stories, and so that was the inspiration behind the next 2. So they are definitely darker tales, but for the most part, the feedback's been very positive about that. People like the fact that it's gotten darker.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Well, and to give a little background, there was some I guess things were put up in the air a little bit after the first one came out because the publisher that you had closed down.
Right.
And so you're sitting there, you have maybe 2 books percolating, but you don't have a place to publish them. What happens then? What goes on in your mind when you get that news?
Yeah.
And how do you kind of pivot and try? What do you do from there?
It was sort of like the carpet being pulled out from under your feet, but I feel like I landed in a really powerful position too. So yeah, indie publishing, I didn't want to self-publish because to be honest, I just didn't know how. So I wanted someone to show me the ropes. Find me a cover artist, find me an editor. Please do all the work for me. Essentially, just let me write. That's the goal of writers. But what you find is that indie publishers are pretty common too, and I didn't know the industry that well. I learned a lot from that experience. I think it's amazing because the moment that I had my rights back, then some of the other authors from that original company, we just decided to join forces and basically create our own. So we called ourselves Four Phoenixes. And you get the metaphor from there. We're trying to come back and come back strong. And 2 months after the publisher closed down, I landed a deal where I sold 15,000 copies, which was 15,000 times as much as they had sold, initially. So it was like, I can do a lot when I decide that, okay, I'm responsible for this. I have to be persistent and ambitious and creative in terms of marketing and finding my audience. And I talked, I do have a couple of agent connections. I'm not currently represented, although I'm trying to be now for a brand new book that I have done that's in a different series. I've decided I'm going to try that route and see how it goes. But I had a couple of agent connections, and I got some really good advice. And it's really interesting. It's like they say the big publishers out there, they're not going to market for you either. That's the thing. It's like I was listening to a podcast with the Duffer Brothers, because Stranger Things 2 is not, you have no idea how I feel like I'm twitching because I haven't seen any of it yet.
Exactly.
So that's my goal tonight.
Dropped at midnight last night.
Yeah, I'm like, gosh, why did they do this to us? I have to get up in the morning. But I was listening to an interview with them, and they said, Netflix told them flat out, we're not going to, just so you know, we're not marketing this. It'll be on our homepage, and hopefully people will see it, but there's no marketing behind it. I'm like, and that's just the way the industry is. So for Stranger Things, it was a word of mouth explosion. Now, given Netflix has a huge number of people going to that home screen who will see that, whereas for an indie author who's not repped by a big publisher, then we have to find that. And so I searched through, I had to find my audience, and I found them creatively through subscription boxes. And again, I think that's just the biggest question for an author is who would read these books and enjoy them, and then how do I let those people know that it exists, right? And so I worked really hard to find that audience, and then over the last couple of years, now I've got, suddenly I've gone from, with the original publisher, maybe it sold a few hundred, upon release, and now we're in the thousands and breaking 10,000 easily, and it's like, it just takes that personal ambition though to make that happen.
Right. Yeah. Well, and you do a few multimedia things usually with the release of each book. What is your idea behind that? Either making documentaries or films or whatever, short film. What is your idea behind that, and what types of things are you doing for Bury the Rabbit?
Yeah. So I mean, I think that it's a pro-con situation with our technology, but the con is there's so much out there. Am I reading? Am I listening? Am I watching? Because I mean there are so many books I want to read. There are so many movies I want to watch. There's so many shows on Netflix. All those types of things. So there's a lot. But the pro, I think, is that as long as you go and find a way to kind of cross over and reach those different disciplines. So right from the get-go, I wanted to do a song, and so for the first book, I mean, I love these guys so much, so shout out to them. Terribly Happy wrote this song called Enter the Rabbit. They performed at my first book release ever, outside in the cold at I Know You Like a Book, which is a beautiful store in Peoria Heights, and they played that song over and over again. I think they played it so much they got sick of it, but it's an awesome song. I mean, it's like, and it's that was one of the things. And then a band called, shout out to them, LTNC, just sent me their song on Spotify. You can look up, I think it's called Rabbit, but LTNC, and I wrote the lyrics for that, and they did a cool song that kind of goes on the darker side of things. Then we just did a documentary called Follow the Rabbit. Jack Stalter directed that. Jack Stalter is a local filmmaker, and that was meant to look at how the writing process and the local writing scene and booksellers and the reading community. And then I do my own trailers for it as well, and anything I can do with music and multimedia. And the reason is simply to try to reach a bigger audience. And that's really what it comes down to. I think that's been one of my ambitions, is just to see if I can't collaborate. And I really would say collaboration is the key to success in anything. The problem in the writing world is a lot of times it's just authors collaborating with other authors. And not that that's a bad thing, but I think authors need to collaborate with musicians and filmmakers and readers. And once you start reaching out into different groups, then you can find new audiences.
Okay. Have you found that effective too? Have you found, using those type of media, is it just like simply, here's 5 people that kind of got excited and maybe they'll tell 5 people and that type of, is that what you're going for when you're trying to use this?
Yeah, that if you get a fan of that band and they hear the song, or you have someone who maybe isn't necessarily a reader who would just pick up a book and read on his or her own, but sees this little video and it's like, oh, okay, maybe I'll give that a shot. So yeah, and one of the things, because at my heart I'm a teacher, that first and foremost I would say, and I love the idea of just trying to get people to read. Even gosh, everyone, there's no way I would compare myself to like some literary grade that's going to teach you wonderful literary things. I'm no Faulkner or anything like that. But that's okay, because sometimes people just need something fun to read. And I've had adults, my age and older, send me messages that, I haven't picked up a book in 10 years. Thanks for getting me back into reading. And my heart just like, it's one thing to get people to like your book. It's another if they'll tell you, I'm reading more now because I liked your story and now I want to see what else is out there from other people too. And so that's my goal with the multimedia stuff, is I'm finding people who are non-readers and trying to get them to read.
All right. Well, and I gotta say, you must have some friends over at Barnes & Noble, because I see the reader, the employee recommends. One of your books always seems to pop up over there.
I got so lucky. Deb, one of the assistant store managers, read it on her own. All right, I didn't send it to her and beg her or anything. She read it on her own, and she put on the staff recommended. And I remember when I did my first signing, Bonnie, who works in like the community relations, she's like, "Oh, by the way, one of our managers really likes your book." And I'm like, "Are you kidding?" Because that's huge news. And then their other assistant store manager, Tyler, wrote this beautiful review, and he put it on their Facebook page. And it's an essay-length review. It's not like, hey, I read this book and liked it. But he gave it this beautiful, heartfelt review, and it's just like, and I swear I'm not bribing them. So it's just like, it's like a thank you. But it's awesome. You got to have that support in your community too. Right. So it's been really cool.
And you already mentioned, and I know you like a book. They did your first one. Have you found some type? Have you found a decent amount of, if not a niche, maybe just like a lot of people here in Central Illinois that are interested in you, interested in what you write, and is that like a good base here? And
there's I think there's a terrific base here, and each bookstore seems to have its own following. So I try to make sure that I do some things for the Book Nook and for Lit on Fire.
Right.
I'm supposed to stop by Lit on Fire later today and drop off some books because they ran out. So that's really cool, right? And the Book Nook's doing a contest. So they've got one of my books on display actually, and you have to guess how many eyeballs are in a jar, and you have until Halloween to do that. So, and the fact that each of these stores is willing to do that, and they don't. The thing that I love about our writing community and the book selling community here is I've never heard a store say anything negative about another store. I've never heard them compete, And I'm sure, of course, you need to succeed in business and you're doing what you can to get ahead. But they're all supportive in their own ways, and I think that's what's so cool about Peoria, because a lot of my author friends that aren't from this area, they're like, how did you get this to happen? I'm like, you know what? People may knock Peoria from time to time, but we've got some great stuff here. We've got some amazing businesses and some supportive entrepreneurs and just awesome people.
Okay. Well, and here's a question that I think it's just a one that maybe either potential authors, writers, or whoever it may be in their respective maybe creative field. How do you carve out your own style and your own stamp on something that for in the case of the thriller kind of horror genre, it's well worn by people that Stephen King.
Yeah.
Those names really stick out. They've really done. How did you go about carving into your own style and your own kind of way of doing this?
Yeah, that's a great question. What I noticed is that while everyone knows Stephen King's name, teaching, especially when I was a high school English teacher, everyone knew who Stephen King was. No one had read a single book by him.
Right.
That's crazy to me. You know, that's like, wait a minute, how can you guys do this? And I see that in my college courses too. I'm like, I go in there and when Game of Thrones is on, I'll be like, oh my God, I can't help myself. I'm like, who saw Game of Thrones last night? And then no one's watching it. I'm like, what's wrong with you? Oh yeah, you have homework. I'm sorry. I forgot about that part of life. But it's so part of what I thought is, and I can build off of their success by paying a tribute to those stories. And then one of the coolest things, again, like one of my readers saying, yeah, I knew who Stephen King was. You clearly love him, all these references and tributes in your story. And now I'm reading his books. So part of my initial way of trying to put my stamp on things was, well, first I'm going to celebrate everything else that's been done as much as I can, and I'm going to piggyback a little bit off of that. No, there's no shame. I don't have any shame in that because I'm trying to. It's really hard to get your foot in the door. So if I piggyback off of something that's already been successful, then like King fans are like, oh, this is really cool. Other people who just have heard of him, they might want to get into it, and then that's kind of book one, right? And then I start to build my own universe off of that.
Right.
My own characters, my own Rabbit in Red world. And it becomes its own entity that's separate then. And so I think the other thing is just going back to classic teen horror too, that there's a lot of young adult stories today, but again, kind of like the ones I grew up on, I don't see a whole lot of those anymore. The genre that the young adult lit today tends to be sci-fi, fantasy, post-apocalyptic, and which is scary.
It can't.
But my type of scary is something else, and so I'm trying. It's almost like bringing it back and giving it a new twist and a new spin and giving it a new cycle.
And Stephen King, it's one of those things where you say people have heard of him, but maybe they haven't read him. It's it's one of those things. Maybe people might associate him, especially of a certain age, with movies more just because his name is on the movie that everyone goes see.
Right, that's
so,
true.
In that vein, there is a new Stephen King adaptation that tore up the box office the last couple months, and it is about killer clowns and all types of other things, but beyond that, what did you think of this adaptation this time around?
Well, I was there opening night, early, advanced tickets, geeking out, and when I first saw it, it took. I don't know what I expected. I saw it the first time and I thought, these kids are amazing. Pennywise looks fantastic. I really think that it was a beautiful story, but it's tribute to, that was great casting, tremendous acting, and there's the young adult love that I just don't see in scary movies anymore, that these kid characters. And so I thought that was beautiful. I think initially my only disappointment was I wasn't scared, and I went home and I just thought, gosh darn it, I really wanted to be scared. I just, but it's hard for someone, I think, who lives in this genre so much to genuinely be scared. Like, I found myself laughing at Pennywise. I thought, that's so funny. And other people might be like, can't even look at it. But I'm like, that's really comical. And so I sat on it for, I think, at least a week, maybe two. And I went back to see it again, knowing what it was. And I loved it so much more the second time. So I would say that to anybody who saw it, and maybe most people, it's getting rave critical reviews.
Right.
But I felt like, maybe it's just one of those things where the hype is built up so much, you just can't wait for it.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you not get a little underwhelmed no matter what when it's built up so much in your head? So the second time was an A. I mean, I give it an A+ no matter what. Okay. But I think it's not as scary as I had hoped it would be. Is all.
Well, and as someone that kind of knows this genre well and knows maybe the mechanics of it, why do you think it did so well? Why do you think so many people showed up to watch it? Was it purely the clown thing? Clowns tend to be a pretty big fear in people's lives. Was it a clown? Was it people wanting to see it again after they had seen the previous adaptation? How would you diagnose how it did so well?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's initially it's great marketing, but it's also, I think we're in a evil clown culture, and of course I would attribute that to the first Stephen King's It, the movie adaptation. I mean, that was huge. I think it was like 91 or 92, and I remember watching it live. I was actually scared by that one, but of course I was only like 10 years old.
Right.
So there's a big difference, and I think people today, you ask people my age, why are you scared of clowns? And they say because of that first It. So for the last 27 years, roughly, we had that movie, and then people have continually tried to make clowns scary. So everything from American Horror Story to lots of independent films I've seen with creepy clowns to just all sorts of things in pop culture. I think that it's kind of fun to play off of the clown fear. And so I think you had adults my age who know of that story and know of that first adaptation, and I think everybody just needed to see it. Everybody wanted to see it. I know people who hadn't gone to the movies in forever, but they were so familiar with it, they just had to see it in the theater. And then with your teenagers and your young adult audience, I just think it was a novelty because they weren't familiar with the first one, but we loved it's the perfect time of year for it. And like I said, the trailers, the trailers blew it out of the water. And I think the trailers hooked everybody. And in fact, if I could go back in time, actually, the only regret I have is I wish I hadn't seen a single trailer.
Yeah.
Because I think that took away a little bit of the surprise of Pennywise. I wish I had gone in without ever seeing that trailer.
And that's kind of an evergreen thing for almost any movie these days. Those trailers are way too long.
Yeah, for sure.
They show too much. Now, okay, you were saying earlier how about you tell your students, you're a big Halloween person. You're going to go to haunted houses until you're 60 years old,
right? Maybe
beyond.
Hopefully beyond.
Yeah, until the pacemaker says.
Right.
It goes.
Like, I have a warning.
But what are your type of rituals, either in the Halloween season or on Halloween? What types of things do you like doing to celebrate?
Oh gosh, yeah. October
holiday?
1st, I have to watch the original Halloween.
Okay.
October 31st, I either rewatch it or I watch H2O. I love that one too. But I have a huge collection of scary movies. I decorate the house. There were some questions about, hey, do you want to come do a book signing on Halloween night? That'd be really cool. And I'm like, no, actually, I want to be home and pass out candy. I think that I want to. I just love celebrating that part of it. So yeah, during October, it's just you got to get to Tanner's, you got to get to a haunted house, you got to watch some scary movies, and that sort of thing. And of course for me, I might watch scary movies. I have my seasons, right? So fall's very easy. Winter, then you have your winter scary movies, and I'll go to The Shining and. Maybe Krampus or something, and then I have my summer movies, Friday the 13th, things like that. So I mean, I watch them all year long, but Halloween in particular is a good time for that.
Yeah, I'm gonna put you on the spot here. What is the best haunted house to go to in Central Illinois?
Oh, okay. I'm going to have to say the asylum in Bartonville.
Okay.
And they've done such a great job, getting bigger and building these real world scares. Now I haven't done the Three Sisters Park one in a few years.
Okay.
So I don't know what that one's like. And as a kid, I loved the Forest City one. And I still try to get to that one. So I have a lot of nostalgia for Forest City. If you've never done Fright Night in Forest City, that's definitely worth it. I know the Haunted Asylum in Bartonville. Those guys, they just do such a great job, and with real scares, and the actors are really into it. That's the thing, is that sometimes in other haunted houses I've been to, it's like you either have too many little kids who they're having a blast, but they're not really scaring me. It's just kind of like, guys, I'm going deaf. Calm down. I like the genuine scare factor. So I think they do a good job for that.
There you go, people from the expert.
Yeah.
Now, real quick, tell us about, you mentioned that you have another series in the works already. Describe the project a little bit.
So it's called Pit of Darkness. And again, I want to play with those young adult themes. So I have these young adult characters, each with almost like an inside-out personality. So you've got your really depressed teen, you got your really angry teen. That sort of thing is how I built it. But it's a fantasy/horror novel, and I'm adding a little bit of fantasy to try to make it a little bit of a broader story too. But my initial premise is sort of something like this. It's there's a fountain of youth style water, okay? And so there's this fountain that gives life, and there's a pit that takes it away. And there are these teenagers crazy enough to believe all of that. And so these teens, all struggling with various aspects of their life, rediscover this magical element that they actually already discovered as kids, but something dark made them forget. And there's a reason why they had to forget about it. And so the Pit of Darkness is actually going to be like a real monster story, where there's this genuine evil represented in the form of a monster that is out to get any person who remembers this magic. And what I wanted to kind of play with too on top of that is sort of that metaphor of the magic of childhood. I think sometimes as adults we lose that wonderful feeling of playfulness. And so I think that's why a lot of teens are depressed and bitter and angry. There's this inner struggle about I want to do this, but I have to do this, and trying to figure out where you fit in, and all that great stuff. And so I thought, let's throw them in this story where they experience real magic and real evil, and so it's going to be a good versus evil story. And I think I don't know, I'm really excited about it. So I'm hoping that I've got one agent out there reading it right now who's accepted the full thing, and I'm shopping it around. And I'm hoping to get a few offers, and then we'll see who might be the best fit for it.
So you've got the whole thing written already?
The whole first book. This could be another series too.
Okay.
So same. It's the book has ended, but it definitely was ended in a way that's like there probably should be a second one, I think, at least. So and that's, I like the series style. It gives you something to talk about for a couple of years.
Yeah, exactly.
instead of one and done, you know.
Yeah, totally. Well, and did you find the monster, incorporating monsters, was that something that you enjoyed in getting into this one?
Delightful.
Yeah.
It's so much fun, and I've always liked the idea too that humans are the real monsters, in the sense that how The Walking Dead will. It's not the walkers in The Walking Dead that scares me. It's the people. And so I wanted to play with that element too, but I also wanted the real monsters. So in this story, the monsters in the pit can actually take over some of the characters. And so my biggest villain is one of those teenagers, because she's manipulated by, and I like the idea of a female villain too. So I've got this wonderful female character, and again, a lot could change between now and when it actually hits shelves, right? But in one of her first scenes, she's with this nerd who's wearing a Star Wars shirt and can't stop talking about it. And so she decides he's going to die, and it's, but there's more to why she kills than that. But I'm I'm playing with that geekdom a little bit too, but also sort of that we're just going to kill off a couple of them, and, because you're annoying. Yeah. So maybe I'm having a little fun of myself that way too. But yeah, then we have genuine evil. The pit is sort of a modern day, fiery inferno, and a different world, in the upside down kind of way of a universe, and so playing with a dimension like that's really difficult, but a lot of fun. So hopefully it comes off very realistic and very scary. And I just want to play with like a lot of life complications too. The whole idea of depression and losing a loved one. So there are all these elements sort of woven into that story, and I try to address it through magic and through evil, and taking those sort of perspectives, I think will really be eye-opening for maybe some teens who are also struggling with depression or the loss of a loved one for the first time, those types of issues. So.
Yeah, excellent. Well, Joe, we appreciate you coming in here and talking with us about the book and about how much you love Halloween and everything.
Oh yeah, this has been great. Thanks.
With Halloween just around the corner, it felt right to bring you in. So you check out Joe from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. on Saturday at Barnes & Noble. He'll be signing books, and you can go and talk to him and buy his book, hopefully.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Joe, for coming in.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Great.